There are certain experiences in life that are difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced them. A 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat is one of them. I've completed 2 10-day silent retreats in the tradition of SN Goenka, and when I look back on both of them, one thought stands out very clearly. They were among the most difficult things I have ever done in my life. That might sound strange. After all, you're not climbing a mountain, you're not running a marathon, you're not being deprived of food or sleep. You're living in a peaceful meditation center surrounded by nature, being fed vegetarian meals and spending most of your time sitting quietly. How difficult could that possibly be? Very difficult, as it turns out. Because when you remove your phone, your books, your music, your conversations, your work, your entertainment, and almost every other source of distraction, something rather interesting happens. You are left with yourself, and that can be an uncomfortable place to be. For 10 days, there is nowhere to go. Nothing to distract you, nothing to consume, nothing to perform. There is simply your body, your breath, your thoughts, and the endless stream of sensations arising and disappearing within you. And perhaps that is why I've found Vipassana so powerful. It strips meditation down to something incredibly simple. Observe what is happening. Don't cling to it. Don't push it away. Just observe. And eventually understand that this too will pass. Although Vipassana traces its origins back more than 2,500 years to the Buddha, the particular tradition I'm talking about today is associated with Satya Narayan Goenka, usually known simply as SN Goenka. Goenka was born in Mandalay, Burma, now Myanmar, in 1924 into an Indian family. He became a successful businessman and prominent member of the local Indian community. From the outside, his life appeared successful. But Goenka suffered from severe migraine headaches, and his search for relief eventually led him to Sayagyi Uba Khin, a respected Burmese teacher of Vipassana meditation. Goenka began practicing with Uba Khin in 1955, and continued studying under him for 14 years. In 1969, with his teacher's encouragement, Goenka traveled to India and began teaching Vipassana there. His first 10-day course was held in Mumbai that year. The first permanent center in India, Dhammagiri, later opened at Igatpuri in Maharashtra, and over the following decades, the movement spread throughout India and eventually around the world. Today there are hundreds of centers and course locations across Asia, Europe, Africa, Australia, and the Americas. And there is something about these centers that I find particularly remarkable. You don't pay to attend. Accommodation is provided, food is provided, the teaching is provided, and nobody presents you with a bill. The courses operate entirely on donations from previous students who have completed a course and want somebody else to have the same opportunity. The teachers and people serving the courses volunteer their time. At the end of the retreat, you can make a donation if you want to and if you have the means, but there is no obligation. That philosophy resonates very deeply with me. There is something beautiful about the idea that spiritual knowledge should not belong exclusively to those who can afford it. You receive something because somebody before you gave. And if the experience has value for you, perhaps you give something so that the next person can receive it too. There's a generosity built into the entire system. The retreat itself is highly structured. When you arrive, you hand over many of the things that normally occupy your attention. Your phone is gone. There are no books, no journals, no music, no podcasts, no television. And you're not supposed to exercise beyond walking during the breaks. For someone living in the modern world, this alone is quite an adjustment. Think about how rarely we experience boredom anymore. Standing in line, check your phone. Waiting for somebody, check your phone. Eating alone, watch something. Walking somewhere, Listen to a podcast. Feeling uncomfortable? Distract yourself. Vipassana removes almost all of those escape routes. And then there is the noble silence. For most of the retreat, you don't speak to the other meditators. You don't communicate through gestures. You don't make eye contact unnecessarily. You're living alongside dozens of other human beings while simultaneously inhabiting a very private world. At first, I found that very strange. Eventually, however, the silence becomes completely normal. In fact, there's something liberating about it. Nobody asks you what you do for a living. Nobody asks where you're from. Nobody cares about your accomplishments. There's no small talk. There is very little opportunity to construct an identity for the people around you. You're simply another human being trying to understand your own mind. The first few days are devoted primarily to a technique called Anapana. The instruction sounds almost absurdly simple. Observe your breath. Don't control it. Don't deliberately breathe deeply. Don't impose a rhythm upon it. Simply notice the natural breath as it enters and leaves the nostrils. That's it. And then you discover how incapable the mind is of doing even that. You observe one breath, maybe two, and suddenly you're thinking about something that happened 15 years ago. Then you're imagining something that might happen next month. Then you're replaying a conversation. Then you're planning what you'll eat when the retreat ends. And eventually you realize, I'm supposed to be watching my breath. So you return. And within seconds, the mind wanders again. At first, this can feel like failure, but gradually you begin to understand that noticing you've wandered is part of the practice. You return again and again and again. The field of observation is gradually narrowed to the area around the nostrils and upper lip, sharpening the mind's ability to detect increasingly subtle sensations. You might notice warmth, or coolness, or tingling, or pressure, or even itching. Something that previously would have seemed insignificant suddenly becomes incredibly vivid. And this lays the foundation for Vipassana itself. Around the fourth day, the practice changes. Instead of focusing primarily on the breath, you begin systematically moving your attention through the body, from the top of the head downward, part by part, observing whatever sensation happens to be present, whether heat or cold, pressure or pain, pulsation, tingling, itching, numbness. Sometimes something extremely subtle. Sometimes nothing obvious at all. And the important part is not really what you feel. The important part is how you respond to what you feel. Or more accurately, how you learn not to respond. This is where the practice becomes inseparable from Buddhist philosophy. One of the central concepts repeatedly emphasized by Goenka is anicca, impermanence. Everything changes. Every sensation arises and passes away. Every emotion arises and passes away. Every thought arises and passes away. Pleasure changes, pain changes, we change. Everything we love will eventually change. And ultimately, of course, this body itself will disappear. Intellectually, most of us already know this. Vipassana asks us to experience it. This became very real for me during my first retreat. I experienced quite a lot of physical discomfort while meditating. And when pain appears during meditation, the natural reaction is incredibly simple. Move. Your knee hurts, move your leg. Your back aches, change position. Your foot falls asleep, stretch it. Normally, there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing any of those things. But Vipassana introduces a fascinating experiment. What happens if you don't immediately react? What happens if you observe the discomfort instead? Not as my pain, not as something terrible, not as something that must disappear, simply as sensation. This becomes particularly intense during what Goenka calls the sittings of strong determination, aditana. 3 times each day, during 1-hour group sittings, students are encouraged to remain completely still. Don't uncross your legs, don't move your hands, don't open your eyes. Just sit for an hour. I found this extremely difficult during my first retreat. An hour can feel remarkably long when your body is screaming at you to move. So you start bargaining with yourself. Maybe I'll just move this foot slightly. Surely that doesn't count. Maybe I'll straighten my back for a second. And then another part of the mind says, observe. So you observe. The pain intensifies. Observe. It changes. Observe. Another sensation appears. Observe. And slowly you begin discovering something. The sensation isn't static. The thing you labeled pain is actually changing from moment to moment. There might be pressure, then heat, then pulsing, then stabbing, then relief, then pressure again. Anicca, impermanence. During that first retreat, it took me until day 9 before I managed to complete an entire 1-hour sitting without moving. I remember that achievement vividly. To anyone else, of course, nothing had happened. I had simply sat on the floor for an hour. But internally, it felt enormous. Because the accomplishment wasn't really about sitting still. It was about discovering that an uncomfortable sensation didn't necessarily require an immediate reaction. And that lesson extends far beyond meditation. Think about how much of our lives consists of reactions. Somebody criticizes us, we react. Someone insults us, we react. We feel lonely, we reach for something. We feel anxious, so we distract ourselves. We experience pleasure, we want more of it. We experience discomfort, we want it gone. The Buddha described these tendencies in terms of craving and aversion. We spend enormous amounts of our lives pursuing pleasant experiences and resisting unpleasant ones. Vipassana trains something different. Equanimity. Equanimity doesn't mean becoming indifferent. It doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means learning to experience reality without automatically being controlled by our reactions to it. A pleasant sensation arises. Observe it. An unpleasant sensation arises. Observe it. Neither will last forever. And this, for me, is where Vipassana becomes much more than a relaxation technique. In fact, I'm not sure I would describe a 10-day retreat as particularly relaxing at all. It is training. Training the mind not to be dragged around quite so easily by craving and aversion. And when the external world becomes quiet, the internal world can become remarkably loud. One thing I remember very clearly from both of my retreats was dreaming. My dreams became extraordinarily vivid. I don't want to make any grand claim about why that happens. Perhaps removing the normal flood of stimulation gives the mind more space to process memories and emotions. Perhaps spending so many hours in concentrated awareness changes the way we notice or remember our dreams. Whatever the explanation, my experience was unmistakable. Night after night, the dreams felt incredibly vivid. People, places, memories, emotions, entire worlds emerging while I slept. And then morning would come, the bell would ring, and back to meditation. There's something almost poetic about it. During the day, you're learning to observe sensations arising and disappearing. During the night, entire realities arise and disappear. And eventually, you wake up. Anicca. Again. There is another aspect of the retreat that surprised me. You can become strangely connected to people you've never spoken to. For days, you sit beside the same people. You walk past them, you eat beside them, you see them struggling, you see them walking slowly after a difficult meditation. You hear someone cough in the meditation hall and know exactly who it is. And yet you know almost nothing about them. Then eventually the silence is broken, and the transformation is remarkable. Suddenly the center fills with voices. People laugh, stories pour out. You discover where people are from and why they came. You discover that the person who seemed completely serene had been struggling just as much as you were. For me, and for many others, breaking noble silence was incredibly cathartic. There was a tremendous release of energy. After spending so long traveling inward, suddenly you're reconnecting with other human beings. And conversation, something we normally take completely for granted, feels almost miraculous. You realize how powerful speech actually is, and perhaps how casually we normally use it. Toward the end of the course, another practice is introduced. Metta, usually translated as loving kindness. After spending days cultivating awareness and equanimity, the practice turns outward. The intention is to share peace and goodwill with others. May others be happy. May others be peaceful. May others be liberated from suffering. I find this to be a beautiful way to complete the practice because it prevents meditation from becoming purely self-focused. We spend 10 days observing ourselves, but the purpose isn't simply to become better at observing ourselves. The deeper question is, what kind of human being emerges from that observation? Are we more patient, more compassionate, less reactive, more capable of listening, more forgiving, more aware of the suffering of others? Because if meditation doesn't eventually influence how we treat other human beings, I'm not sure what the point is. There's also an uncomfortable truth about meditation retreats. They end, and going home is easy. Maintaining the practice is harder. Goenka recommended that serious practitioners meditate for 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening. 2 hours every day. I'm not there yet, I have to admit. At the moment, I'm managing one 1-hour meditation each day, and I'm happy with that. I would love to eventually increase it to 2 sessions because I understand the logic behind the recommendation. A retreat can show you the technique. It can give you an extraordinary environment in which to practice. But eventually you have to bring the practice into ordinary life. Because equanimity is relatively easy to talk about while sitting quietly in a meditation hall. The real test comes when someone annoys you, when you're stuck in traffic, when somebody criticizes you, when plans fall apart, when you lose something you value, when you're frightened or you're angry, when life refuses to behave the way you want it to behave. That's where the meditation continues. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. But I would recommend it with one important qualification. Don't expect it to be easy. Both of my retreats were incredibly challenging. At various points during both of them, I remember thinking, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And yet I've returned, and I would return again. Because difficult and worthwhile are not opposites. Sometimes the things that challenge us most deeply are precisely the things that reveal something important about ourselves. A 10-day Vipassana retreat removes many of the ways we normally escape from discomfort. No phone, no books, no music, no journal, no conversations, no entertainment. For 10 days, you practice observing reality as it presents itself, breath by breath, sensation by sensation, moment by moment. You discover how restless the mind is. You discover how quickly you react. You discover how desperately you sometimes want pleasure to continue. You discover how desperately you sometimes want discomfort to end. And gradually, perhaps, you discover another possibility. Observe. Don't cling. Don't resist. Understand that it will change. Anicca, impermanence. That doesn't mean we become passive about life. It doesn't mean we stop pursuing meaningful goals. And it certainly doesn't mean that we should tolerate situations that genuinely require action. It simply means that between what happens to us and how we respond, we can cultivate a little more awareness. a little more space, a little more freedom. And perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts meditation can offer. Not a life without pain, not a life without difficulty, not permanent happiness, but a different relationship with everything we experience. Pleasure comes and pleasure goes. Pain comes and pain goes. Thoughts come, thoughts go. People enter our lives, and those same people leave our lives. Our bodies change and our circumstances change. We change. Everything is moving, everything is becoming, everything is passing away. And perhaps wisdom begins when we stop demanding that the impermanent becomes permanent. I've completed 2 10-day Vipassana retreats. Neither was easy, but both were immensely rewarding. And if you're genuinely interested in learning meditation, not merely as an intellectual idea, but as a disciplined practice, I would highly recommend experiencing one for yourself. 10 days can sound like a long time. When you're sitting in pain on day 3, it can feel like an eternity. But eventually, day 10 arrives. You speak again, you collect your phone, you return to the world, and the world looks remarkably similar to the one you left. The traffic is still there. Your responsibilities are still there. Your problems have not magically disappeared. But perhaps something subtle has changed. Not the world outside you, but the way you experience it. And then the real practice begins. As always, thanks for listening.